The wind howled across the plains of Silver Creek, carrying the dry scent of dust and distance. Evening shadows stretched long across the road as Clara Bennett trudged forward, her thin boots scuffing the hard-packed earth. The hem of her faded skirt was torn, her shawl soaked with the remains of a passing storm, and every step she took seemed heavier than the last. A month ago, she'd been a maid in one of the finest homes in town, the Whitmore estate. Now she was an outcast. They said she'd stolen Mrs. Whitmore's silver brooch, though Clara knew the truth. The real thief was the lady's spoiled nephew. But no one had cared to listen to the word of a poor orphan girl with no family to defend her. They'd thrown her out without pay, without mercy, and without a single friend left in the world for weeks. Clara wandered the edges of town, sleeping in barns or beneath the stars, working for meals when she could. But Silver Creek was a place that remembered gossip better than kindness. Doors that once opened to her now stayed shut. Mothers whispered warnings to their daughters not to speak to her. Storekeepers watched her like a stray dog sniffing for scraps. As twilight deepened and a cold wind rose, Clara pulled her shawl tighter. She needed shelter, someplace, any place, to escape the storm brewing on the horizon. The sky was bruising purple, thunder rolling low like the growl of an angry beast. Every ranch she passed had already shuttered its doors, lanterns dimmed against the coming rain. When the first drops began to fall, she quickened her pace. In the far distance, through sheets of gray mist, she saw a light glimmering, a single lamp burning steady in a ranch house window. Hope flickered inside her chest, faint but alive. She hesitated as she neared the gate. The sign read Turner Ranch, the name carved deep into weathered wood. She'd heard of Elias Turner, the widowed cowboy who lived there with his 2 little girls. Folks said he'd been quiet since his wife's death 3 years back, more comfortable among horses than people. But they also said he was fair, honest, a man who didn't turn his back on someone in need. Still, Clara's hand trembled as she lifted it to knock. The wind whipped her hair loose, rain stinging her cheeks. "Please, Lord," she whispered. Just one night out of the cold. The door opened sharply. A tall man filled the frame, his expression wary. His dark hair was damp from the storm, his face shadowed by a day's stubble. A rifle hung loosely in his right hand. Behind him, the warm light of the hearth cast a golden glow, the scent of wood smoke drifting out. "What are you doing out here in this weather?" he asked, his voice low and cautious. Clara swallowed hard. I'm sorry to bother you, sir. I've nowhere else to go. I just need a dry place to rest for the night. I'll leave by morning, I promise." Before the man could answer, a small voice piped up from behind him. "Papa, who's that?" A little girl with honey-colored curls peeked around his leg, her curious eyes wide. Another younger child toddled into view, clutching a rag doll. Clara's heart clenched. She hadn't seen such innocence in months. The older girl looked at her father, then at Clara again. "Papa, can she stay, please?" Elias Turner's gaze lingered on Clara a long moment. Something in her eyes, tired but honest, seemed to disarm him. Slowly, he lowered the rifle and stepped aside. "Come in," he said simply. Clara stepped over the threshold, feeling the warmth wash over her like sunlight. She didn't know it yet, but that single act of kindness would become the first step toward a new life, one that would test her courage, heal old wounds, and lead her to a home she never thought she deserved. The scent of wood smoke and bread wrapped around Clara like a fragile comfort as she stepped inside the Turner Ranch. The room was simple, rough-hewn beams, a stone hearth, a sturdy table scarred by years of use, but to Clara, it felt like heaven compared to the biting wind outside. She stood just past the doorway, dripping rainwater onto the floor, unsure where to place her hands or her eyes. Elias Turner shut the door behind her with a firm click. His presence filled the space. Broad shoulders, weather-creased face, and eyes that held both weariness and quiet strength. Clara could tell he was a man used to carrying more than his share of burdens. He studied her in silence, the rifle now resting harmlessly against the wall. "You're soaked through," he said finally. "Sit by the fire before you catch your death." Clara hesitated. "I don't want to intrude, ma'am," he interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. "You're already here. Sit." She obeyed, moving closer to the hearth. The heat bit at her frozen fingers until they stung, but it was a pain she welcomed. She stared into the flames, too tired to speak, too wary to believe this moment of kindness would last. Behind her, she heard the soft patter of small feet. The older girl, Rose, came closer, dragging a quilt from a nearby chair. "You can have this," she said shyly, holding it out. "Mama made it before she went to heaven." Clara's breath caught. "That's very kind of you, sweetheart," she murmured, her voice trembling. "But I couldn't, please," Rose insisted, her blue eyes wide and earnest. Elias said nothing, just watched as Clara accepted the quilt, wrapping it gently around herself. The youngest, Lily, toddled forward with a wooden toy horse clutched in her hand. "He don't bite," she said solemnly, offering it to Clara as if it were an introduction. A soft laugh escaped Clara's lips, the first in a long while. "Well, that's good to know," she said, smiling down at the child. Elias cleared his throat, turning toward the stove. "There's stew if you're hungry." The mention of food made her stomach twist painfully. She hadn't eaten since dawn. "Thank you," she whispered. He ladled a bowl and set it on the table. She approached hesitantly, murmured a prayer of thanks, and began to eat in small, careful bites. Elias sat opposite her, watching quietly, his daughters leaning sleepily against his arms. The storm outside deepened, rain hammering the roof like 1,000 tiny drums. For a long while, the only sounds were the crackle of fire and the occasional clink of her spoon. When she finished, she set the bowl down and lifted her eyes. "I'll go once the rain lets up." "You've done enough, Mr. Turner." He leaned back in his chair, one brow raised. "You've got somewhere to go?" "No," she admitted softly. "But I don't want to be a burden." Elias rubbed a calloused hand over his chin, thinking. "Burden's a word folks use when they forget what decency means," he said finally. No one should be out in this kind of weather. His words struck something deep within her, a gentleness she hadn't expected. The warmth of his tone, the steadiness of his gaze, the way his daughters felt safe enough to rest against him. It stirred an ache she couldn't name. After a moment, he stood. "You can sleep in the spare room tonight. It's not much, but it's dry and warm. Tomorrow we'll see what's what." Clara rose, clutching the quilt tighter. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded once, already turning to bank the fire. "Good night, Miss Bennet." As she entered the small, tidy room, she heard little Lily call out sleepily, "Papa, is she going to stay forever?" Elias chuckled quietly, answering in a tone meant only for his daughters, but Clara heard it all the same. "We'll see, sweetheart. We'll see." And for the first time in years, Clara fell asleep feeling safe. Morning came soft and gold across the plains. Sunlight slipped through the thin curtains of the small room where Clara Bennet had slept, a room that smelled faintly of cedar and clean linen. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then she heard the muffled laughter of children in the next room, the low rumble of a man's voice, and it all came back, the storm, the kindness, and the widower who had opened his door when no one else would. She rose quietly, smoothing her wrinkled dress and folding the borrowed quilt with care. The house was still, save for the hiss of the stove. When she stepped into the main room, she found Elias Turner already up, his sleeves rolled, frying eggs in a cast-iron pan while his daughters giggled beside him. He looked up briefly, tipping his hat in greeting, though he wasn't wearing one. "Mornin', Miss Bennet." "Good morning, Mr. Turner," she said softly. "I thank you again for last night." "I'll be on my way soon," Rose frowned.
"You can't go yet."
"You didn't even have breakfast." Clara smiled gently at the child. "You're sweet, but I shouldn't overstay," Elias cut in, voice firm but not unkind. "Eat first. You'll need strength before you decide where you're headed." So she stayed. The eggs were plain, the bread a bit stale, but to Clara it tasted like grace. As they ate, she noticed how the girls' dresses were worn thin, their hair uneven from makeshift trimming. The house, though sturdy, carried signs of neglect. A layer of dust on the shelves, laundry piled by the door, unpolished boots scattered near the hearth. It was the home of a man doing his best alone. After breakfast, Elias and the girls went out to feed the livestock. Clara watched through the window as the widower hoisted Lily onto a horse, her laughter carrying through the crisp morning air. He smiled at his daughters in a way that softened his rugged features, a man still learning how to be both father and mother. When they returned, Clara was already sweeping the floor. "You don't need to do that," Elias said, a hint of protest in his tone. She straightened, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "I can't just sit idle. You've been kind enough to let me stay. The least I can do is be useful." He studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod. Suit yourself. By noon, the house had begun to change. The dishes were washed and neatly stacked. The windows opened to let in fresh air. The girls scrubbed and laughing as they helped polish furniture. Clara moved through the home as if she had always belonged there, quiet, steady, full of gentle energy. Elias watched her from the doorway, arms crossed. There was something about her presence, a calmness he hadn't felt since his wife, Mary, passed. But he also knew the cost of growing used to someone's company. People left. Life had taught him that lesson hard. When the ranch hands returned from the fields, they tipped their hats politely, surprised to see the tidy kitchen and the smell of stew simmering on the stove. One of them, Tom, grinned. Looks like the boss finally got himself some help. Elias only grunted. She's just here for a few days. But Clara caught the faint note of something behind his voice, an uncertainty he didn't care to admit. That night, after supper, the girls curled up by the fire while Clara mended their clothes. The sight of the small flickering family scene made Elias's chest ache with both gratitude and fear. It was too easy to grow comfortable again, too easy to hope. And as for Clara, each stitch she made was a quiet prayer that this fragile peace might last, even just a little longer. Yet she knew deep down that peace on borrowed kindness never lasted long. Outside, the wind whispered across the open plains, carrying with it the promise of change. The days passed gently, marked by the rhythm of ranch life. Clara Bennett had begun to rise with the sun, her hands busy before dawn, baking biscuits, washing clothes, and teaching little Rose and Lily their morning prayers. What started as an offer of temporary shelter had quietly grown into something that felt dangerously close to belonging. But with every passing day, Clara's heart grew heavier with a truth she couldn't ignore. This wasn't her home. She was a guest, a wanderer living on borrowed kindness. And in a small town like Silver Creek, borrowed kindness always came with an expiration date. She noticed the glances the ranch hands exchanged when she passed, the whispers at the general store when she came into town for supplies. That Turner widower sure moves quick. He's letting that outcast woman raise his girls now? The words burned like dry straw catching flame. Clara kept her head down, pretending not to hear. That evening, when she returned to the ranch, Elias was waiting by the barn, hat in hand, expression grave. "You've been good to my girls," he began, voice rough from a day in the fields. "They've taken a real shine to you." Clara folded her hands to keep them from trembling. "They're sweet children, Mr. Turner. It's been a blessing to help." He nodded slowly, gaze fixed on the darkening horizon. "They laugh again now. Haven't heard that sound much since Mary passed." His throat tightened around the name. Clara looked down, the ache in his voice cutting deep. She understood loss, the way it hollowed you from the inside, leaving only the shape of what used to be. "I'll be leaving tomorrow," she said quietly. "You've given me more than I deserve. I don't want to bring trouble to your door." Elias's head snapped up. "Leaving?" She nodded, forcing a smile. "The weather's fair now. I'll find work somewhere, maybe in the next town over." He took a step toward her, rain beginning to fall softly between them. "And where will you go, Clara? You've got no family here, no one waiting." She lifted her chin, pride and pain warring inside her. "I'll manage. I always have." Elias stared at her for a long moment, jaw working as though he were wrestling with words he wasn't used to saying. Then finally he spoke. "My daughters need a mother, and you need a home. I can't think of a better arrangement." Clara froze. The rain picked up, dripping from the brim of his hat, running down her cheeks like tears. She blinked, unsure she'd heard right. "What are you saying?" He met her eyes, steady as stone. "I'm asking you to stay, not as a guest. As my wife." The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Marriage to him? It felt impossible. "Mr. Turner," she whispered, "you don't even know me." "Folks talk. There are things you've heard." "I've heard plenty," he said simply. "And I've seen enough to know what kind of woman you are. You've cared for my girls like they were your own. That tells me more than gossip ever could." Her heart thudded painfully. "You're offering me charity." He shook his head. "No, I'm offering you a place in this family. A chance for all of us to stop being alone." For a long moment, Clara couldn't speak. She stared at him, this man who owed her nothing yet offered her everything. She wanted to believe him, but the fear of rejection, of not being enough, clawed at her chest. Finally, she whispered, "If you're sure, then I'll stay." Elias stepped closer, rain misting between them, and said softly, "I've never been more sure of anything." That night, as thunder rolled across the plains, Clara lay awake in her small room, heart racing, mind swirling. She was to be a wife, a mother, a Turner, and though fear whispered that it could all crumble come morning, for the first time in years she dared to dream that maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found where she belonged. The wedding took place 2 days later under the wide, endless sky of Silver Creek. There were no guests, no flowers, no grand dresses, just the preacher, a few ranch hands as witnesses, and the Turner girls clutching wildflowers they'd picked from the field. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush and the sound of sparrows as Elias Turner took Clara Bennett's trembling hand in his rough, work-worn one. When the preacher spoke the words, "You may now join hands as husband and wife," Clara felt her heart skip like a stone across water. She had entered this agreement out of gratitude and necessity, not love, but something deep within her stirred all the same. Afterward, they rode back to the ranch in silence. The girl sat in the wagon, dozing against Clara's shoulder while Elias held the reins. The sun dipped low, painting the horizon in hues of gold and rose. It was the beginning of a new life, but one Clara wasn't yet sure how to live. That first week of marriage was quiet, almost painfully so. Elias gave her space, perhaps sensing her unease. He continued his long hours in the fields, and at night, he often sat alone on the porch, staring out toward the mountains. Clara, meanwhile, poured herself into the rhythms of the household, cooking, sewing, teaching the girls their letters, and tending the small vegetable garden that had long been neglected. The girls, however, treated her as if she'd always been there. Rose followed her everywhere, eager to help with chores, while little Lily climbed into her lap each night for a bedtime story. In their laughter, Clara found a kind of healing she hadn't known she needed. Still, she could feel the distance between her and Elias like a wide stretch of prairie. They shared polite conversation at supper, kind smiles in passing, but nothing more. At night, she slept in the small room next to the girls, a quiet reminder that theirs was a marriage of convenience, not affection. One evening, as the first chill of autumn crept in, Clara found Elias repairing a saddle in the barn. She hesitated before speaking, twisting her apron in her hands. "Elias," she began softly, "I wanted to thank you for everything you've done for me." He looked up, brow furrowed beneath the lamplight. "You don't owe me thanks, Clara. You've done more for this house in a month than I could have hoped for." Her cheeks warmed. "Still, I know this wasn't easy for you or the girls. I want you to know I'll do my best to make this work." He studied her a moment, then nodded slowly. "I know you will." There was something unspoken in his gaze, respect, maybe even admiration. The silence that followed wasn't awkward this time. It was soft, alive with a new kind of understanding. As the days passed, their partnership began to take shape. Elias consulted her on ranch matters, trusted her judgment with the children, and even began to smile more freely. They shared coffee in the mornings, and sometimes, when she laughed, he found himself laughing too. Yet Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she was living in borrowed happiness. When she ventured into town for supplies, the whispers started up again. That Outcast married the widower Turner. She's just after his ranch. The sting of those words followed her home like a shadow. That night, when Elias noticed her quietness, he asked, "You all right?" She forced a smile. "Just tired," but inside doubt churned. She feared that one day the same rumors that had destroyed her before would rise again, and this time, they'd tear apart the fragile peace she'd built. For now, though, as she watched Elias reading to his daughters by the fire, the warmth in her chest outweighed the fear. Maybe, just maybe, this marriage built from necessity could become something more. And perhaps, if she dared to believe it, love could take root even in the hardest soil. Autumn deepened across Silver Creek, painting the plains in russet and gold. At the Turner Ranch, life had found a quiet rhythm. The days began with coffee and the soft laughter of children, and ended with stories by the hearth. For Clara, each sunrise felt like a promise kept, proof that she had finally found a place where she was needed, even wanted. But peace has a way of drawing out the ghosts one tries hardest to forget. It started the morning she rode into town for supplies. The air was crisp, the sky an endless blue, and Clara felt light for once until she stepped into the general store and froze. Standing by the counter, adjusting his fine leather gloves, was a face she thought she'd never see again. Mr. Samuel Whitmore, her former employer, the man whose family had ruined her life. "Miss Bennet," he said smoothly, his tone laced with cold satisfaction. Or should I say, "Mrs. Turner now?" Clara's pulse thudded in her ears. "What are you doing here?" He smiled, the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "Business. My uncle's cattle trade has brought me west. Imagine my surprise to find you here, playing house on some ranch." She turned to leave, but he stepped in front of her. "Does your new husband know who you really are? That you're a thief and a liar?" His voice dropped low, meant for her alone, but the storekeeper's eyes flicked up, curious. "I was never a thief," she said firmly, though her voice trembled. Whitmore chuckled. "That's not how the papers back east tell it. You'll never wash that stain off, Clara. Men like Turner don't keep women with pasts like yours once they learn the truth." Her fingers tightened around the basket handle. "You've said enough." He leaned closer, his breath hot and foul. "Tell him yourself, or I will." She pushed past him and fled, her vision blurring as she stepped into the sunlight. The humiliation, the fear, the helplessness, all of it came rushing back like a wave she couldn't stop. When she returned home, Elias noticed the change immediately. She was quieter, distracted, her smile faint and brittle. That night, after the girls had gone to bed, he found her sitting by the window, staring into the dark. "What happened today?" he asked gently. Clara tried to brush it off. "Nothing. Just tired." He knelt beside her, his gaze steady. "You can tell me the truth, Clara." Something in his tone, steady, patient, kind, broke her resolve. The words came tumbling out. She told him everything. The false accusation, the shame, the long nights alone. The way Whitmore had followed her with his threats. When she finished, she waited for the disgust, the anger, for him to tell her to leave. But Elias didn't speak right away. Instead, he stood, jaw tight, eyes dark with something fierce and protective. "Where is he now?" "In town," she whispered. "Elias, please, don't—" But he was already reaching for his coat. "No one threatens my wife." By the time he returned, the fire had burned low. His knuckles were scraped, his shirt damp with rain. He said nothing as he hung his coat, but the storm in his eyes told her enough. Clara rose slowly. "What did you do?" "Made it clear he's not welcome in Silver Creek," Elias said simply. Then softer, "You should have told me sooner. You don't have to face things alone anymore." She felt her throat tighten. "I thought, if you knew, you'd send me away." He stepped closer, brushing a damp strand of hair from her cheek. "Clara, I didn't marry you out of charity. I married you because this house, my life, needed you. I won't let anyone take that from us." For the first time, she believed him, not just his words, but his heart. That night, as she lay beside him for the first time, the walls she'd built around her soul began to crumble. The outcast had finally found someone willing to fight for her, and though the rain still whispered against the windows, the storm inside her heart had finally begun to calm. Winter came early to Silver Creek, blanketing the Turner Ranch in soft white snow. The air was sharp, the mornings hushed, and smoke curled steadily from the chimney, a sign of warmth and life inside. For Clara Turner, it felt as though she was seeing the world anew. The ranch that had once seemed lonely and worn now felt alive, filled with laughter and light. The girls chased each other around the kitchen table while Elias chopped wood outside, his deep voice drifting in through the open window as he hummed an old tune. The darkness of the past weeks had lifted. Since that night in town, Mr. Whitmore had vanished from Silver Creek, humiliated and beaten back by Elias's quiet fury. Word spread quickly among the townsfolk. Rumors that the widow Turner's husband had dealt with the stranger who'd wronged his wife. But what really changed was not their gossip. It was the way they began to look at Clara afterward. When she entered the general store now, people greeted her with hesitant smiles. Mrs. Donnelly, the shopkeeper's wife, even handed her a sack of flour with a warm, "Your husband's a good man, Mrs. Turner." The title still startled her sometimes, Mrs. Turner. But it felt right. One morning, a letter arrived from back east. Clara nearly dropped it when she saw the seal. It bore the Whitmore family crest. Her hands trembled as she broke it open. Inside was a brief note scrawled in Mr. Whitmore's uncle's formal hand. Miss Bennet, pardon Mrs. Turner, I've discovered the missing silver piece. My nephew confessed before leaving the territory. Your name is cleared. My apologies for the misunderstanding. Her knees nearly gave out as she read it again and again. Cleared. The word echoed through her like a bell. After years of whispers and shame, she was finally free. When Elias came in from the barn, she ran to him, clutching the letter. He read it silently, his expression softening into a slow, proud smile. Told you the truth always finds its way out. Clara laughed through tears. But after all this time, I never thought it would. He reached out, brushing her cheek with his thumb. Doesn't matter now. You've already proved the kind of woman you are. To me, to our girls, and to this ranch. She leaned into his hand, emotion tightening her throat. I wanted to belong somewhere, Elias. To someone. He looked at her with quiet certainty. You do. That evening they gathered around the fire. The girls were rosy-cheeked from playing in the snow, their small voices filling the room with songs their mother once sang. Clara watched them with a tenderness that made her chest ache. When Rose climbed into her lap and asked, "Mama, can we make cookies like before?" The word Mama caught Clara off guard. She blinked, tears pricking her eyes. "Yes, sweetheart," she whispered. "We can make all the cookies you want." Elias glanced up from his chair, smiling softly at the sight. "Looks like you've been promoted," he teased. Clara laughed, brushing a curl from Rose's forehead. "Best job I've ever had." Outside, snow fell thicker, covering the ranch in silence. The house glowed with warmth, filled with the sounds of a family that had been broken once, but not anymore. Later that night, after the girls had gone to bed, Clara stepped outside to watch the stars. The world was still in silver, every surface glistening with frost. Elias joined her, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. "Cold?" he asked. "Not anymore," she said softly. "Not since I found home." He turned to her, a smile in his eyes. "Then it's yours. For good." And as they stood together beneath the vast western sky, Clara realized that the love growing between them wasn't born of convenience or duty. It was the steady, enduring kind, the kind that heals roots deep and lasts through every season. At long last, she wasn't the outcast anymore. She was Clara Turner, wife, mother, and heart of the ranch. The long winter finally began to thaw. The snow melted in slow, glittering rivulets that trickled down from the mountains, feeding the dry earth. Calves were being born in the lower pastures, and the sound of new life echoed across the land. For Clara Turner, it felt as though the ranch itself had been reborn, just as she had. She stood on the porch that morning, watching the first hints of green push through the soil. The breeze was cool but gentle, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Inside the house, she could hear the girls' laughter as they helped Elias patch a broken chair. The noise, once chaotic to her ears, now felt like music, a melody of belonging. Clara smiled. There had been a time she thought she would never laugh again, that no one would ever call her name with kindness, that no man would ever look at her without suspicion. But now, when Elias met her eyes across a crowded room or across a muddy field, it was with warmth, pride, and something she had learned to trust: love. One afternoon, she rode out with him to mend a section of the fence near the creek. The sky was clear, the land golden with promise. Elias worked in steady rhythm, his sleeves rolled, the muscles in his arms flexing as he pulled the wire taut. "You know," Clara said lightly, "when I first arrived here, I thought I'd only stay for a few days." Elias smirked without looking up. "And now," she paused, smiling at the sight of the ranch spread wide before them. "Now I can't imagine being anywhere else." He turned to her, his face soft in the afternoon light. "That's good, because I can't imagine this place without you." The words hit her deep, not grand, not rehearsed, but steady and true. Just like him. She dismounted and walked over, taking his gloved hand. "You've given me more than shelter, Elias. You gave me a family, a name, a reason to stay." He squeezed her hand gently. "You gave us something too, Clara. Hope, laughter. You made this place a home again." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant ridge, they gathered around the dinner table. The girls were eager to share their drawings, pictures of horses, flowers, and a family of 4 standing outside a big house with smoke curling from the chimney. Rose proudly held hers up, "This one's us, Mama?" Clara's heart swelled. The simple drawing said everything words could not. She leaned down to kiss her daughter's cheek. "It's perfect, sweetheart." Elias looked across the table, his expression quiet and full. "She takes after her mother," he said softly. Clara laughed shyly, her cheeks flushing with warmth. Outside, twilight spread over the plains, painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold. The air buzzed with crickets, the lowing of cattle in the distance. It was a simple life, yes, but it was hers. Later that night, as the girls slept, Elias and Clara sat on the porch, wrapped in a shared blanket. The stars shimmered like scattered diamonds overhead. "Do you ever think," Clara whispered, "that we were meant to find each other?" Elias tilted his head, thoughtful. "Maybe not meant, but we were ready. You needed a place to belong, and He exhaled slowly, eyes drifting toward the dark horizon. "I needed someone to remind me what living really felt like." She rested her head on his shoulder. "Then maybe that's what love really is. Not something we find, but something we build." He smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Then let's keep building it." In the days that followed, the ranch blossomed with new life. The girls planted a small garden with Clara by the porch, while Elias fixed the old barn doors and added a new nameplate above the entrance, Turner Ranch, Estring by Family. When Clara saw it, her eyes filled with tears. It wasn't just a name. It was a story, a promise that even the broken and forgotten could find new beginnings. And as the warm wind swept across the valley, carrying laughter, love, and the scent of wildflowers, Clara Turner knew the truth in her heart. She had come seeking shelter. But what she found was home,